We've got a lot of questions for you here, beginning with this market reaction. This is a monster move to see a day in which the Dow's up over 1,000 points, the S&P 500 is up some 2%, but the bond market is moving in the other direction. We're looking at a 4.5 here as of this moment on the 10-year. What do you make specifically of the reaction in the bond market? This is clearly in anticipation of some sort of inflationary event.
Well, here's the thing. When I was talking with investors and clients, as I do, that's most of my day job. The simple question is, what happens if Harris wins? What happens if Trump wins? And my initial read, in very simplistic terms, was Harris, bad for equities, good for bonds. Trump, good for equities, bad for bonds. And that related to the fact where I see growth and also how the market initially would react to things. So, for example, with Trump, equities are up because the market's more excited about growth, lower tax rates, less regulation, et cetera. But the bond market gets worried about more spending, tax cuts, et cetera. And like the CBO, for example, they're going to initially probably score a Trump budget as being, more deficit-related spending. The Tax Foundation found that. The problem with it is that we don't know the specifics yet. And I'd argue if you look back at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 and you see what CBO scored, the revenue numbers in 16, we actually got the money in 18. In other words, the tax cut paid for itself. So I think these are knee-jerk reactions, and then we'll see what happens once we get some meat to the bone.
Well, so as you consider the timeline you just said there, knowing that there was $8 trillion in deficit added during the first Trump administration, the Committee for Responsible Budget says it could be another $15 trillion, if not all of it pays for itself. But it is a question of time, especially knowing these markets are discounting mechanisms. They are looking well ahead. So when we consider sequencing here, things like tariffs, that could potentially hit the economy first before the actual beneficiary impacts of lower taxes is fully felt and recognized in corporate profits and the like, right? How should we think about the way in which this plays out?
Right. So you're absolutely right. Markets are forward-looking, and they may fear or they could think that, okay, tariffs are inflationary. It's a one-off price adjustment. But again, it would be how are the tariffs implemented? And what would the U.S. be getting in return? I think there's this misperception that day one of Trump, we're going to have tariffs across the board, X%, and this is my guess, and in China it's going to be at least 60%, maybe higher. To me, it's going to be more nuanced. It's going to be very transactional. In other words, tariffs are going to be used in large part as a tool to essentially have more fair trade. So, for example, the U.S. has certain environmental regulations and certain rules against child labor. Some of our trading partners don't have those same rules, and we're at a disadvantage. So to the extent tariffs can level the playing field and make trade fair, I think that makes sense. Also, it would depend, too, what happens with energy policy. If we have a significant amount of drilling and energy production, that will offset the tariffs, even if the tariffs, for argument's sake, were implemented across the board. The energy share of the economy is bigger than the import share of the economy. So it really depends how it's going to be put into place. And I always tell people, look at things, the broad policy set. Like, don't focus just on the tariffs. Don't focus just on the tax cuts. Look at the holistic approach in terms of trying to increase productive capacity.
I guess a simpler way, though, of asking my question would be, are we likely to feel the inflation before we feel the growth?
No, I don't believe so. I don't believe so because if energy prices stay low, that will immediately hit people's pocketbooks in a positive way. Prices will come down. The general rule of thumb is every 1 penny change in gasoline is worth about $1 billion in terms of an energy tax cut. So if you get prices down 50 cents, may not seem like a lot, but in a $25 trillion economy, that's basically like a $50 billion tax cut immediately.